Welcome back. Well, joining me now, it's two men who sit on the important Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security as MPs. But more than that, both have operational experience before entering politics in keeping their fellow Australians safe. And that's retired Army General Jim Molan, New South Wales Senator, of course, who joins us from Canberra, and former Victoria Police Officer and Liberal MP for Latrobe in Melbourne, Mr Jason Wood. Gentlemen, great to have you on the show tonight. This is a very important issue. You're both on the powerful Intelligence Committee. Jason, you're also the chair of a Migration Committee. I want to come back to you, if I can, in a moment on the migration issue. But firstly, Jason, give us a sense, in an operational way. You worked in counter-terrorism in Victoria. What would it mean nowadays with the encryption constraints that officers have? It'd be like trying to deal with the issue of terrorism with one arm tied behind your back, wouldn't it?
In some ways, it's actually worse. I go back to my days at the organised crime school. We're regularly taking out telephone intercepts and listening devices, warrants, and the public wouldn't be aware that for a warrant, the amount of effort the investigator, the detective has to put together, the amount of analytical information they receive, and all the background checks. Now, it may take a detective a couple of weeks. Then it goes through various chains of command and specialist units before it ends up in, say, the Supreme Court. And that's back in 1980, or the 90s, when I was looking at those telephone intercept warrants. And we had pretty good access to, actually, I just recall, at the time we only had access to analogue phones, and the excitement was when we could actually go to digital phones. That's where we're at the moment, where law enforcement, what they're telling me is organised crime and the terrorists are just miles in front of them. And we need to give our law enforcement every tool possible. And you go, when I visited London, when they had the awful London Bridge attacks, and they had a number of people killed, and sadly including 2 Australians, and law enforcement over there saying, why don't you just arrest them if you knew who they were? The problem is they don't have the tools to actually, whether it be in the UK or in Australia, the law enforcement do not have all the tools to get right into places such as the dark web, the encryptions everyone is using. We just have to give law enforcement the tools to put them on not even a level playing field. They're never going to be in front, because terrorists and criminals are always one step ahead of the police, but we have to at least give them something to protect lives and disrupt organised crime groups.
Jim Molan, I want to get into some other issues, if I may, but just really quickly, going dark. I mean, imagine when you were back in Iraq leading the Allied team for the West, really. If you'd gone dark, it would have cost the lives of your men and women soldiers. That's what the police are threatened with here, because to date 90% of the communications going on in the terrorist realm are blind to police. They say it's going to get worse. How confident are you that Labor will see sense and support this legislation?
Well, I am fairly confident from the experience that I've seen in relation to the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, Peter, and I suspect we'll talk about that later. But from what I've seen, that committee, and I can't talk about what happens inside the committee.
No, I understand.
But that's a bipartisan committee. It's an extraordinary collegiate committee. The spirit is very, very good. I think all sides, both sides, there's only Labor and Liberal represented in it. Every one of us understands that intelligence and security is so critical. The level of cooperation is fabulous. Now, perhaps, and we've seen in the Espionage and Influence Bill that was tremendously done and improved through that process. What I haven't seen yet is, as it pops out the far side, whether it's manipulated for political purposes at this stage. But certainly, very quickly, my experience from Iraq, where we ran both a terrorist campaign and a counterinsurgency campaign, was that we didn't know much of what was going on at the best of times, and that's what the police are going to be facing now. And the consequence of that is that bad people have the incentive. You've got to wait for them to do something, and then you react, and that costs lives.
And that's just terrible in an urban situation like we had on Friday. Jason Wood, you're also the chairman of the Migration Joint Committee. You're interested in looking at things like intervention orders for extremists. You're also talking about the cancelling of visas for violent thugs, and I understand that legislation's already before the Parliament. Fill us in.
Yeah, well, we had an inquiry, and obviously it started because of the issues we had in especially Melbourne and in parts of my electorate with African crime. We found that overwhelmingly when the Australian Intelligence Commission looked at the background of a number of the Apex gang members, out of the initial 60, only 6 are actually born in Australia. You've been hearing these figures out in the public that most were born here. That was incorrect. So the inquiry, the recommendations, and Senator Molan was also inquiry, we made some pretty strong recommendations that if you commit a violent offence, such as a home invasion, aggravated burglary, sexual offences, and you're on the visa, our view was on the coalition side that you'd have your visa forfeited because we don't believe you now have the privilege to be an Australian citizen. The law as it stands at the moment under the character test 501, the person must receive a year's jail. My view and my fellow colleagues, that shouldn't be the case. Sadly, we had the opposition actually led by Shane Newman, who would be Bill Shorten's Home Affairs Minister, actually put in a dissenting report strongly refuting that we need to change the laws. And even when we came to the issue of violent extremism, again, the coalition members put in place recommendations to have something similar to a family violence order, which would work that if a family member of a person where they're worried about the extremist activities of, it could be a son or it could be law enforcement watching a person. For example, they can be watching beheading videos, talking jihad all day. Police have no power to do anything about that. And you go back to the 23rd of September 2014 with Newman Hader stabbing 2 police officers, previously been walking around the Dandenong shopping centre with an IS flag. We've had so many incidents over the last couple of years from the Brighton attacks and recently.
Jason,
police are desperate to have intervention orders in place. We need something to help them out.
Jason Wood, time is going to be against us. I know I've got Jim Molan on the program on Wednesday, tomorrow night. Jason, would you come back if you can? I'll talk to your office to see if I can't get you back on Thursday night because I really want to get into these migration issues with you. Certainly. And you're the expert. That'd be fantastic. Jim Molan, Jason Wood, thank you very much for your time tonight. And thank